They had ruled the stars for 11,000 years. Their empire stretched across 400 star systems, and in all that time, no species had ever challenged them and lived to tell the story. They were old. They were powerful. They had forgotten what it meant to be afraid. When their deep space probes first detected the strange signals coming from a small blue planet in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy, the High Conclave gathered to discuss what should be done. The signals were primitive, radio waves leaking into space like blood from an open wound. The species that made them called themselves humans. They watched these humans for many years. They studied their broadcasts, their wars, their strange and violent history. What they saw disturbed them greatly. These creatures were aggressive beyond reason. They fought each other constantly over land, over resources, over ideas. They had discovered how to split the atom, and instead of using this knowledge for power or medicine, they had immediately built weapons. They had burned 2 of their own cities with atomic fire, killing hundreds of thousands of their own kind in the blink of an eye. The seers of the conclave made their calculations. If these humans were left alone, they would develop faster-than-light travel within 300 years. Within 500 years, they would become a regional power. Within 1,000 years, they might challenge the hegemony itself. They did not tolerate rivals. They never had. This was how they had survived for so long. High Arbitrator, the eldest and of the conclave, spoke the words that sealed Earth's fate. "They are too dangerous to ignore," he said, "too unpredictable to control. We must end them now while they are still confined to their single world. This is not cruelty. This is wisdom. This is survival." The vote was unanimous. Earth would be destroyed. Fleet Commander received his orders without emotion. He was a veteran of many campaigns, a soldier who had helped exterminate 17 species during his long career. This would be his 18th. He felt nothing about it, no excitement, no regret, no curiosity. It was simply a task to be completed, like clearing weeds from a garden. 200 warships were assigned to the mission. This was far more than necessary. A single destroyer could reduce a continent to molten glass in a matter of hours. 200 ships could sterilize a dozen worlds. But the Conclave wanted to send a message to any other young species that might be watching from the darkness. The message was simple. This is what happens to those who might one day threaten us. As the fleet prepared for departure, a young analyst named submitted a report to her superiors. She had spent years studying the human broadcasts, and something about this species troubled her deeply. "They are not like the others," she wrote. "Every species we have encountered follows predictable patterns. They develop, they expand, they reach a certain point, and then they plateau. The humans do not follow these patterns. They accelerate. They take risks that should destroy them, and somehow they survive. They walked on their moon using nothing but controlled explosions and courage. They split the atom and used it for war within years of discovering it. They are unpredictable in ways I cannot model." She concluded her report with a warning. "I recommend we send scouts first. I recommend we learn more before we commit our fleet. These humans may be more dangerous than they appear." Her superiors read the report and dismissed it. Was young and inexperienced. She had never seen a fleet in action. She did not understand that no primitive species, no matter how aggressive or unpredictable, could stand against their technology. The humans had not even colonized their own moon properly. They were insects waiting to be crushed. The report was filed away and forgotten. On the day the fleet departed, Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Silence, and watched as 200 vessels arranged themselves in perfect formation. Each ship was a masterpiece of engineering, carrying weapons that could crack planets and shields that could withstand the heat of a star. The crews were disciplined and experienced. The outcome was not in doubt. "How long until we reach the target system?" asked. 7 rotations, Commander," his navigation officer replied. "We will emerge beyond the orbit of their 8th planet and advance in standard formation. At our current speed, We will reach the target world within 3 additional rotations. Nodded. 10 days from now, Earth would be nothing but ash and memory. The humans would join the long list of species that had erased from existence, a footnote in the history of the galaxy, a cautionary tale that would never be told because there would be no one left to tell it. Begin translation, he ordered. The fleet's engines hummed with power. Space itself bent around the vessels as they prepared to cross the vast distance between stars. In the conclave chambers back home, the leaders of the hegemony had already moved on to other matters. The destruction of Earth was a foregone conclusion, barely worth their attention. None of them knew that far away, on that small blue planet, humans had been watching the sky for decades. They had found probes years ago, had captured them, studied them, taken them apart piece by piece. They knew they were not alone in the universe. They knew something was coming. And they had been preparing. In bunkers beneath mountains and installations hidden on the dark side of the moon, in submarines prowling the ocean depths and stations drifting silent in the asteroid belt, humanity waited. They had spent generations building weapons that could not imagine, defenses the conclave's seers had never predicted. They had turned their entire solar system into a trap. The humans had a saying old as their species: hope for the best, prepare for the worst. They had hoped the aliens would be peaceful. They had prepared for the alternative. Now, as the fleet crossed the stars to deliver death, humanity finished its preparations and waited in the darkness. 8 billion people held their breath and looked up at the sky, knowing that the greatest test in human history was about to begin. They were afraid. Of course they were afraid, but fear had never stopped humans before. It would not stop them now. The fleet emerged from space like a swarm of angry gods. 200 warships, each one larger than anything humans had ever built, arranged themselves in perfect formation beyond the orbit of Neptune. Commander stood on his bridge and looked at the distant yellow sun, feeling something close to satisfaction. In a few days, this unremarkable star would shine down on nothing but dead rock and radioactive ash. Begin scanning, he ordered. I want a complete picture of this system before we advance. His sensors swept across the solar system, cataloging everything they found. The results confirmed what they already knew. The humans were primitive beyond belief. Their satellites were crude boxes of metal and wire. Their space stations were fragile bubbles that would shatter at the slightest touch. Their ships used chemical propulsion, burning fuel like savages burning wood. They had not even colonized their own neighboring planets properly. Just a few small outposts on their moon and the fourth planet, barely worth noticing. Allowed himself a moment of contempt. This would not even be a battle, it would be an execution. Advance in standard formation, he commanded. We will reach the target world in 3 rotations. Begin charging primary weapons. The fleet moved forward, 200 ships crossing the void like a wave of death. They passed the 8th planet, then the 7th, then the 6th with its beautiful rings. Everything was quiet. Everything was according to plan. Then 3 scout vessels disappeared. There was no warning, no distress signal, no explosion or debris field. The 3 ships were simply there one moment and gone the next, vanishing near the 4th planet as if they had never existed at all. Stared at his display in confusion. Equipment failure, perhaps. A malfunction in their tracking systems. Send a squadron to investigate, he ordered. Find out what happened to those ships. 12 vessels broke formation and accelerated toward the 4th planet. They scanned everything within range, searching for any sign of what had happened to their companions. They found nothing but empty space and a strange electromagnetic interference that made their instruments sing with static. Then the 12 ships vanished too. For the first time in his long career, Commander felt a cold finger of doubt touch his heart. Something was wrong here. Something was very wrong. All ships halt advance, he ordered. Raise shields to maximum, prepare for. He never finished the sentence. From the darkness of space, from places the sensors had said were empty, humanity attacked. Not with one weapon or two, but with everything they had built over decades of secret preparation. The first assault was not physical. It was information, a virus that had been designed specifically for technology, built from the probes humanity had captured years ago. The virus spoke directly to the quantum cores that controlled the alien vessels, rewriting their programming, turning friend into enemy. 40 ships suddenly opened fire on their own fleet, their crews screaming in confusion as their weapons targeted their own allies. Before anyone could understand what was happening, the second wave arrived. These were kinetic weapons, chunks of metal launched years ago, accelerated to incredible speeds, calculated to arrive at exactly this moment. They struck the shields like hammers, overloading systems that had never faced such crude but devastating force. Then came the drones. Millions of them poured out of the asteroid belt, each one no larger than a human fist. They had never seen anything like them. They were too small for the main weapons to target, too numerous for point defense to stop. Each tiny drone carried a speck of antimatter, barely enough to see, but more than enough to gut a warship when delivered to the right place. The drones swarmed through gaps in the shields, through exhaust ports and sensor arrays, through any opening they could find. When they detonated, they did not destroy ships, they crippled them, taking out engines and weapons and life support with surgical precision. Commander watched his fleet die around him. Ships that had conquered worlds were torn apart by weapons that should have been impossible. Vessels that had stood against the most advanced species in the galaxy were being destroyed by creatures who had not even left their own solar system. "How is this possible?" his tactical officer whispered. "They are primitives, they should not have any of this." But the humans were not primitives. They had only looked primitive because they had wanted to look that way. For decades, they had hidden their true capabilities, burying their weapons deep underground, disguising their installations as civilian facilities, keeping their most advanced technology away from any probe that might be watching. Now the mask was off. Now the humans showed what they really were. From a bunker beneath the surface of the moon, Admiral Way commanded the defense of Earth. She was 60 years old and she had spent her entire adult life preparing for this day. She had no family, no hobbies, no life outside her duty. She had given up everything to ensure that when the aliens came, humanity would be ready. "Status report," she said calmly. 63 enemy vessels destroyed or disabled, her aide replied. Another 40 are fighting each other due to the virus. The rest are in disarray. Nodded. It was a good start, but only a start. More than half the enemy fleet was still functional, and even one warship could devastate Earth if it got close enough. "Continue the attack," she ordered. "All units, all weapons. Do not stop until every single one of them is destroyed." This was the human way of war, not proportional response, not measured force. When faced with extinction, humanity believed in only one thing: overwhelming, relentless, total violence. They would not negotiate. They would not accept surrender. They would destroy every single ship that had come to kill them, and they would make sure the universe knew what happened to those who threatened Earth. On the bridge of the eternal silence, Commander tried to organize a retreat. But every direction he turned, he found human weapons waiting. The asteroids were full of hidden installations. The space around every planet was mined. Even the empty void between worlds held surprises, dormant weapons that activated as they tried to flee, catching them in crossfires they could not escape. Realized with growing horror that the humans had turned their entire solar system into a killing ground. Every rock, every moon, every patch of empty space had been prepared. This was not a species that had just discovered the aliens existed. This was a species that had known for years and had spent every moment getting ready. "Open a channel," he ordered desperately. "All frequencies. I wish to communicate with the human command." There was no response. The humans were not interested in talking. They were only interested in killing. Deep beneath the surface of the moon, Admiral Wei watched the battle unfold on screens that covered every wall of her command center. Around her, hundreds of officers worked at their stations, coordinating the greatest military operation in human history. The room hummed with quiet efficiency. There was no panic, no shouting, no confusion. Everyone knew their job. Everyone had trained for this moment for years. Enemy fleet down to 92 functional vessels, her tactical officer reported. They are attempting to regroup near the sixth planet. Studied the display with cold eyes. 92 ships was still enough to destroy Earth 10 times over. The battle was far from won. Release the second wave, she ordered, and activate the Saturn perimeter. Thousands of kilometers away, hidden among the rings of Saturn, weapons that had drifted dormant for years suddenly came to life. They were simple devices by human standards, nuclear warheads strapped to engines, aimed at the space where the enemy was trying to gather. They accelerated outward in a spreading cloud of death. They had never seen nuclear weapons used in space combat. Their shields were designed to stop energy beams and plasma bolts, not crude atomic explosions. When the first warhead detonated against a cruiser's hull, the electromagnetic pulse alone was enough to blind every sensor on the ship. The heat and radiation that followed tore through armor that had withstood battles across 100 worlds. Commander watched another dozen ships die and finally understood the truth. The humans were not fighting like a civilized species. They were fighting like animals, cornered animals who knew that defeat meant extinction. We need to target their command structure, his surviving tactical officer insisted. If we can find their leaders, eliminate their central command. There is no central command, replied quietly. He had realized this terrible truth over the past hours of combat. Every one of their units operates independently. Every ship, every station, every weapon platform has the same orders and the same authority. There is nothing to cut off. There is no head to this beast. This was humanity's secret doctrine, developed over centuries of war against itself. They called it distributed command. Every submarine captain, every orbital platform commander, every pilot in the asteroid belt had been given the same simple instructions. Engage the enemy until the enemy is destroyed. No negotiation, no surrender, no quarter. If Admiral died, the battle would continue. If the moon base was destroyed, the battle would continue. If every general and admiral in the solar system was killed, the battle would continue. There would always be someone left to fight, someone with the authority and the will to keep attacking until the last human was dead or the last alien ship was destroyed. They had never faced anything like this. Their own military was rigidly hierarchical. Remove the commander and the fleet would fall into confusion. Remove the command ship and the other vessels would wait for new orders. This was how civilized species fought wars. But humans were not civilized, not when their survival was at stake. On Earth, 8 billion people watched the battle through whatever feeds they could access. They saw the explosions blooming in the darkness between planets. They saw the enemy ships burning and breaking apart. And they understood, perhaps for the first time, what their species was truly capable of when pushed to the edge. A young man in Brazil watched from the roof of his apartment building, tracking the distant flashes of light with his grandfather's telescope. A woman in Japan held her daughter close and whispered prayers to gods she had never believed in. A soldier in Germany stood at his post, ready to fight even though he knew his rifle would be useless against vessels from the stars. Everywhere across the planet, humanity waited and watched and hoped. In the asteroid belt, Captain Sarah commanded a ship that officially did not exist. The Vengeance was small by the standards of the alien fleet, barely 100 meters long, but it carried weapons that would have terrified the scientists who had designed them. Antimatter torpedoes that could accelerate projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed. drones armed with nanomachine payloads that could eat through any hull. "Captain, we have a group of 5 enemy ships trying to break through our perimeter," her sensor officer reported. "They're making a run for Earth." Did not hesitate, all ahead full, weapons free. The Vengeance leaped forward, joined by a dozen other human vessels that had been hiding among the rocks. They fell on the fleeing ships like wolves on wounded prey, hitting them from every direction at once. The aliens fought back with weapons that could have leveled cities, but the human ships were fast and agile and utterly without fear. They accepted losses. They did not retreat. 2 human ships died in the engagement, burning up in flashes of light that briefly the sun. But all 5 vessels were destroyed, and the survivors of the human squadron immediately turned to find new targets. This was how humans fought. They did not calculate acceptable losses. They did not preserve their forces for future engagements. When survival was at stake, they spent lives like water, trading 1 human ship for 1 alien ship and counting it a victory. It was brutal, it was wasteful, and it was absolutely terrifying to face. Commander tried one last time to communicate with the humans. He broadcast on every frequency, in every language his translation systems could manage. He offered to withdraw. He offered to negotiate. He even offered to surrender, something no commander had done in 3,000 years. The humans did not respond. They simply kept attacking. In her command center, Admiral received the surrender offer and deleted it without a second thought. She had read history. She knew what happened when you let an enemy retreat to fight another day. She knew that mercy today meant more war tomorrow. "No response," she ordered. "Continue the attack until every enemy vessel is destroyed." Her officers did not question her. They understood. They had come to exterminate humanity. They had sent 200 ships to turn Earth into a dead rock. They had not come to negotiate or threaten or demand tribute. They had come to kill every man, woman, and child on the planet. There could be no peace with such an enemy. There could be no treaty or agreement or understanding. There was only war, and war had only one acceptable outcome: total victory. The battle raged for 3 more days. They fought with the desperation of the doomed, but they were outnumbered now, outnumbered by a species they had thought primitive and weak. Human ships poured out of hidden bases throughout the solar system. Human weapons struck from angles the aliens never expected. Human soldiers boarded crippled vessels and fought room by room, corridor by corridor, until every alien aboard was dead. When it was over, 200 warships had been reduced to drifting wreckage. Not one vessel escaped. Not one survivor made it back to tell the hegemony what had happened. Admiral stood in her command center and looked at the displays showing the debris fields where an alien fleet had once been. She allowed herself one moment of relief, one brief instant where she was not a commander, but simply a human being who had survived. Then she straightened her shoulders and turned to her officers. "Begin salvage operations," she ordered. "I want every piece of alien technology recovered and studied. We need to learn everything we can about their ships, their weapons, their drives." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was hard as iron. "This was just the beginning. They will send more, and when they do, we need to be ready." Humanity had won its first battle against the stars, but the war had only just begun. In the great halls of the conclave, the leaders of an 11,000-year empire waited for news that would never come. A standard extermination mission required 3 rotations of the target world. The fleet would arrive, destroy all life on the planet, and return home to report success. It was routine. It was simple. It was what they had done dozens of times before. 3 rotations passed, then 10, then 100. The fleet did not return. At first, the conclave assumed there had been some delay. Perhaps the humans had scattered throughout their system and needed to be hunted down one by one. Perhaps the fleet had encountered unexpected asteroid activity. There were 1,000 possible explanations, all of them reasonable, all of them wrong. High Arbitrator ordered communication probes sent to the Sol system. These were fast vessels, unmanned, designed to cross the vast distances between stars and report back what they found. 3 probes were dispatched. None returned. Felt the first stirrings of unease. He had ruled the conclave for 600 years. He had overseen the extermination of 9 species. He had never lost a fleet before. He had never even lost contact with a fleet before. They did not lose. Send more probes, he ordered, and prepare a second fleet. The second fleet was smaller than the first, 50 vessels instead of 200. But these were faster ships, more heavily armed, crewed by veterans who had fought in a dozen campaigns. They would find out what had happened to the first fleet and finish the job if necessary. The second fleet entered the Sol system and transmitted a single burst of data before falling silent. That burst lasted less than a second, but it contained images that made the conclave members gasp in horror. Human ships were waiting for them. Not the crude chemical rockets they had expected, but real warships, hundreds of them, sleek and deadly, arranged in formations that showed military discipline and training. And behind those ships, floating in the wreckage of the first fleet, were construction platforms. The humans were building more vessels even as they fought. The 50 ships of the second fleet were destroyed in less than an hour. Now the conclave truly began to fear. 250 warships had been sent to destroy a primitive world. Not one had returned. This was unprecedented. This was impossible. This should not be happening. Called an emergency session of the full conclave. Every senior member attended, their holographic images filling the great hall with worried faces. For the first time the rulers of the hegemony did not know what to do. We must send an overwhelming force, one counselor argued. 1,000 ships, 10,000, enough to crush these humans no matter what tricks they have developed. And if those ships are destroyed as well, another replied, we would weaken ourselves fatally. Our other subjects would sense our vulnerability. The rebellions would begin within a year. Then what do you propose? That we simply ignore what happened? That we let these humans grow stronger while we debate? The arguments went on for days. Some wanted to negotiate. Some wanted to launch an immediate full-scale invasion. Some wanted to quarantine the Sol system and wait for the humans to destroy themselves. No one could agree on anything. While the conclave debated, the humans did not wait. They were working day and night, salvaging the wreckage of the first fleet, reverse engineering every piece of technology they could find. Within months, they had cracked the secrets of travel. Within a year, they had built their first faster-than-light vessel. Within 2 years, they had built 100. The young analyst, whose warnings had been ignored before the first fleet departed, submitted a new report. This time, the conclave listened. They are not just defending themselves anymore, she wrote. They are expanding. They have claimed every planet and moon in their system. They have begun mining operations in their asteroid belt on a scale we have never seen. They are building a war economy. She paused before delivering her most troubling conclusion. Based on their current rate of growth, they will have the industrial capacity to match our core worlds within 15 years. Within 50 years, they will exceed us. The conclave read her report in silence. They had spent so long at the top of the galactic order that they had forgotten what it meant to be challenged. They had grown comfortable, complacent, certain of their own superiority. Now that certainty was crumbling. A third fleet was assembled, 100 vessels this time, carrying the most advanced weapons the hegemony possessed. They were sent not to attack but to establish a blockade, to contain the humans within their own system, while the conclave decided on a permanent solution. The third fleet reached the outer edge of the Sol system and found that the humans had already expanded their defensive perimeter. The perimeter was now larger than any they had ever seen, stretching from the orbit of their outermost planet to a distance twice as far. More importantly, the humans had improved upon technology. Their new ships were faster than anything in the Third Fleet. Their weapons hit harder. Their shields held longer. The battle lasted 6 hours. It was a massacre. Not one vessel survived long enough to retreat. In his private chambers, High Arbitrator reviewed the casualty reports and felt something he had not felt in 600 years. Despair. 350 ships, countless thousands of soldiers, all gone, all destroyed by a species that had been using chemical rockets just a few decades ago. He pulled up the original file on the humans, the one prepared before the First Fleet launched. He read through the analyst's warnings, the warnings he had dismissed so easily. He looked at the images of the human broadcasts, the wars they fought among themselves, the atomic fire they had unleashed on their own cities. And finally, he understood. They had looked at the humans and seen a primitive species. Violent, yes, aggressive, certainly, but primitive, weak, easy to destroy. They had not understood what they were really looking at. They had not seen the truth behind the violence and the aggression. The humans had evolved on a death world. Their planet was covered with predators and poisons and natural disasters that would have wiped out any other intelligent species. They had survived plagues that killed half their population. They had survived ice ages that froze their world for. They had survived asteroid impacts and supervolcanoes and 100 other catastrophes that should have ended their story before it began. They were not primitive. They were survivors. They had been fighting for their existence since before they climbed down from the trees. War was not something they had learned. It was something they were. And now, for the first time in their history, they had found an enemy worthy of their full attention. Closed the file and sat in silence for a long time. Outside his window, the stars of the hegemony shone cold and distant. Stars that had belonged to his people for 11,000 years. Stars that might soon belong to someone else. He had made a terrible mistake. He had sent ships to exterminate the humans, and in doing so, he had taught them that the galaxy was dangerous. He had given them a reason to expand, to grow, to build weapons and ships and armies. He had woken something that should have been left sleeping. And now it was too late to put it back to sleep. 20 years had passed since the First Fleet arrived in the Sol system. 20 years since 200 warships had come to exterminate humanity. 20 years since none of them had returned. On a quiet day in the great halls of the Conclave, a single vessel emerged from space at the edge of territory. It was small, barely larger than a shuttle, and it carried no weapons. It simply drifted there, broadcasting a message in every known language, including Perfect. Every sensor in the region focused on that tiny ship. Every weapon system locked onto it. But no one gave the order to fire, because everyone wanted to know what the humans had to say. The message began with a star chart. It showed the Sol system, that small yellow sun that had caused so much trouble, surrounded by all the planets and moons and stations that humans had claimed. The chart had been updated since the last looked. The humans had spread throughout their entire system now. They had colonies on every world, stations orbiting every planet, shipyards building new vessels at a pace that seemed impossible. Then the chart expanded, and the Conclave members felt their blood run cold. The chart now showed the entire hegemony, every world, every station, every outpost, every hidden base and secret installation, all of them marked, all of them, the humans knew exactly where everything was. A recording began to play. It showed an old human woman sitting behind a desk. She had gray hair and a face lined with age, but her eyes were sharp and clear and utterly without mercy. She wore a military uniform covered with medals and ribbons, each one representing a battle fought and won. Admiral Wei had survived to see this day. She had led the defense of Earth 20 years ago, and she had spent every moment since preparing for what came next. "You sent 200 ships to destroy us," she said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, like a teacher explaining a simple lesson to a slow student. None of them came back. You sent 50 more. They died too. You sent 100 after that. They died as well. She paused, letting the weight of those numbers sink in. 350 of your warships, thousands upon thousands of your soldiers, all dead, all because you decided that humanity was a threat that needed to be eliminated before we could grow strong enough to challenge you. The Admiral leaned forward slightly, and her eyes seemed to look directly at each conclave member who watched. You were right. We were a threat. We are a threat, but not because we wanted your territory or your resources or your power. We were happy on our little blue world. We would have been content to explore the stars peacefully, to meet new species as friends rather than enemies. Her voice hardened. But you did not give us that choice. You came to murder our children. You came to turn our world to ash. You came to wipe out every trace that humanity had ever existed. She stood up from her desk and walked to a window. Outside, the camera showed a view of space, human ships by the hundreds, stretching to the horizon, each one armed and ready for war. We could have stopped after defeating your fleets, she continued. We could have fortified our system and waited for you to try again. That would have been the rational thing to do, the safe thing. She turned back to the camera, and something dangerous flickered in her eyes. But that is not who we are. We do not wait for enemies to attack us again. We do not give aggressors time to prepare. You tried to exterminate us. You failed. Now we are coming for you. The recording showed more images. Human fleets moving through space. Human soldiers training for combat. Human factories producing weapons at a rate that belief. In 20 years, humanity had transformed itself from a single-planet species into an interstellar power capable of threatening the oldest empire in the galaxy. We are not coming to conquer you, Admiral said. We have no interest in ruling your worlds or enslaving your people. That is not what humans do. We are coming for one reason and one reason only, to make sure you can never threaten us again. She listed her demands: the complete disarmament of the hegemony, the release of every species that had subjugated over the trials for those who had ordered the attack on Earth, reparations for the human lives that had been lost in the defense. You have 1 year to comply, she said. After that, we will come and take what we demand, and if you resist, we will do to your worlds what you tried to do to ours. The recording paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft, almost sad. You had 11,000 years of peace because no one could challenge you. No one was strong enough. No one was crazy enough. But you made a mistake. You attacked the one species in the galaxy that was both. She smiled, and it was not a kind expression. We are humanity. We survived our own planet trying to kill us for 1,000,000 years. We survived plagues and ice ages and wars that should have ended our species a dozen times over. We split the atom and walked on our moon and built wonders your ancient empire cannot imagine. Her final words echoed through the halls of the conclave like a death sentence. We survive, we adapt, we remember, and we never forgive. The transmission ended. The small human ship sat there for a moment longer, then turned and accelerated back toward the Sol system. No one tried to stop it. In the conclave chambers, no one spoke for a long time. The High Arbitrator sat on his throne and stared at the empty space where the human's face had been. He thought about his 11,000-year empire. He thought about the hundreds of species that had bowed to rule. He thought about all the worlds they had conquered, all the enemies they had crushed, all the times they had believed themselves invincible. And he understood at last what the humans were. They were not conquerors. They had no interest in building an empire like the hegemony. They were not saviors either. They did not care about the species that had oppressed. They were something far more dangerous. They were consequences. For 11,000 years, they had done whatever they wanted to whoever they wanted. They had destroyed species for being inconvenient. They had enslaved worlds for being weak. They had ruled through fear and power, and the certainty that no one could stop them. Now someone could. 1 year later, exactly as the human admiral had promised, the first human fleet arrived at the border of the hegemony. It was larger than any force that had ever assembled, thousands of ships built from salvaged alien technology and improved with human ingenuity. And behind it came more fleets, and more and more. The war that followed lasted 7 years. It was not a close contest. The humans did not fight for glory or honor or territory. They fought to win. They fought to make sure no one would ever threaten their home again. They fought with the cold efficiency of a species that had spent its entire existence learning how to kill things that wanted to kill it. When it was over, the hegemony existed only in history books. Their fleet was destroyed. Their weapons were confiscated. Their leaders were tried for crimes against sentient life and punished according to human justice. The species they had enslaved were freed. The worlds they had conquered were given back to their original inhabitants. The empire that had ruled for 11 crumbled in less than a decade. And in the center of it all, on a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, 8 billion humans looked up at the sky and knew they were safe. They had faced extinction. They had stared into the darkness and seen death coming for them. And they had done what humans always did. They had fought back. They had survived. They had won. The galaxy would never forget them. The galaxy would never threaten them again. Humanity had arrived, and they were here to stay.